Hello, everybody, and even if you don't have a body, I'm Layman Pascal on the Integral Stages author series, traipsing through books, pamphlets, publishing enterprises, and more from around the world of developmental, transcendental, transrational meta-discourse. You know the one. Today we're doing something slightly different. Frank Marrero, school teacher, Adida devotee, and mastermind behind the legendary B-Zone website, is indeed an author. But today we're looking at some teaching materials that he's written, specifically to introduce the concepts, opportunities, and pitfalls of early developmental stages to children. So let's delve into some big philosophy for little kids and examine the patterns of growing up with a bright guy who's always a pleasure to talk to. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Layman. How you doing?
Fantastic. Great to see you.
Yep.
Let's try to give people a sense of what you've been working on here. You've been developing a kind of curriculum, phraseology, and exercises to assist children in the first few maturational stages.
Yes, I have a curriculum called Big Philosophy for Little Kids, and it's a curriculum that's used in public school. Was used in public schools. You can find it either on my website, frankmarrero.com, or on Amazon. But this is kind of dovetailed into I'm in a group of people who we're doing this for adults. So not tell children about what it is to grow up, tell adults about what they missed about growing up. So the theme is still the same. Really grow up. So
we'll get, I think a little bit later, we'll want to focus a bit on that adult thing in terms of what we can do to repair and deal with and heal and aid to those stages we might not have gone through perfectly. Yeah. But when it comes to children, what do you think kids gain by having clarity and framing of their own development as they go through it, rather than, as most of our ancestors did, just sort of experiencing it and finding their way through in the dark?
Well, it's like every person of whatever age. If you have a vision of where you're going, it's easy. There's an elegance that goes along with knowing where you're going, and that's true for if you're watch somebody build a Lego set that you've never seen before. Oh, that's how it's going. It's simple. If you have an actual vision of where you're going, then going there has a natural elegance. That's all. And now, but I've had kids come back. I've been doing this for decades, and I've had kids come back after they were adults and say that this course I took them through was the most useful thing in their entire schooling career, particularly in the third stage or the adolescent years. There's every stage has a liability or a test. And in the third stage, it was called, I call it the three-headed dragon of dilemma, doubt, and depression. And I say, look, the three-headed dragon bites everyone. No one gets out of adolescence without a real tussle with dilemma, doubt, and depression. And, as you know, teen suicides are a thing. And that's because they didn't know it was a dragon. If you know it, that the dragon is you're going to encounter a dragon, instead of just being eaten, at some point when you're going down, you go, wait a minute, this is the dragon. Okay, I know what to do. So I felt like it actually saved lives, not just made lives better.
Appreciate that. Okay, so for anybody who's watching or listening, I think we'll get into some considerations later about how this scaffolding of stages relates to other ways of envisioning maturation. What are the general principles of growth? How does development relate to transcendence? What are some of the higher stages, that sort of stuff. But let's get started by really digging in and going through these first three, and then exploring in a little bit more depth what are the traps and limitations that commonly lead to the adolescent stagnation.
Well said.
All right, so what are the first three stages, and then let's dig into the first one.
Well, let's start way back at the Vedas.
All right.
And the Vedas said there were three stages of maturation, early maturation, and they said you treat, and that's basically goes from the first breath to the loss of primary teeth. That's stage one. Stage two is the beginning of your permanent teeth, as we call it in America, to onset of puberty, approximately. Although menses and all those things can happen over such a wide range. That's really not accurate. So think of it in 7 years, 0 to 7, 6 to 13, 12 to 20, somewhere like that. It's not a definitive line, but there's overlap as one melts into the next. So those are the first 3 stages. In the Vedas, they said, treat your first stagers like gods, treat your second stagers like servants, and treat your third stagers like adults. Now, what they meant by that is obviously you don't treat them as gods in the first few years. We have enough megalomaniacs running around. It meant the kind of service that is going to be required of you. In the second stage, you are dealing with energies, and so you need to learn to put your energy out. In the third stage, it is called trial adulthood. So that's a very hard, difficult stage because you're no longer a child and you're not yet an adult. So it's trial adulthood. So that was the Vedic vision. I learned this in detail from my beloved Adida, who had me serve the children's culture. And as he pointed out, if you get a discriminative acuity about what each of the stages is for growing up, it will serve you as an adult. So I was thrown in with the kids where I belonged, and I learned a lot. So the first stage starts with the first breath. Its focus is in the body. It matures in simple autonomy. Now, it's not just that you can pee by yourself, poo by yourself, dress yourself, go to sleep by yourself, and you can say, I do it. And it's not just that. I tell people, imagine a child running down a path. Usually in the first few years, they're always looking back to see if mom or dad, if they're okay. Everybody knows what that looks like. Well, at some point, they are so rested in themselves, they don't look back to make sure they're okay because they know they're okay. So that's an example of the kind of autonomy I'm talking about. Now, what makes most sense to a child in the first 7 years is bodily. That doesn't mean you don't talk to them. Doesn't mean they don't have feelings. Doesn't mean they can't understand a logical argument. But that's not where they're at. Where they're really at is how their body feels. And so you would discipline a first stager, as we would say, by giving them a hug. No, hey, come here. You're feeling bad. Come here. Let me have a hug. Or, if you're going to keep that up, you should sit over here. And when you're ready to, not bang the table so loud, come back with us, okay? That's what makes most sense to them. And the test of that is to not just be only the body, just want to have ice creams all the time and watch TV, getting dull. A couch potato would be something anyone of any age could fail at this first level of adaptation. If you're a lot of couch potatoing, that represents a failure. It's not that you can't sometimes obviously enjoy it. Sometimes you just need to chill. But to have it be too much, that would be an error or a liability of the first level of adaptation. It's that is. Do you have any questions about that? Or
so adults who are around this.
That's another matter. Yes,
first person, right? We're primarily trying to help them establish physical self-regulation and communication, something like that. And then that means not too much of any given thing.
Yes, but the autonomy can be seen in adults, or a failure of it is, do you fundamentally trust? Can you rest? Can you be by yourself without stimulation? Do you accept your own character or personality? Or do you kind of hide parts of it or want to change parts of it? Or is that one of your obsessions? Well, then that's an example of not having completed the first stage. So do you fundamentally trust the people who you're close to?
Right.
So that is what it looks like in adults. So as an example.
I'm curious about the the development of the skills of being able to show up as your bodily self with people,
Yes.
and also of being able to give and receive,
Hmm.
energy and feeling with other bodies.
Hmm.
So that's all within this. That there's like a range of different kinds of
Absolutely.
self-regulatory and communicative skills that need to be developed here.
Right. And are you someone in that play, as you mentioned it? Are you self-generative, or are you passive, waiting for others to? Are you just always being responsive or reactive, rather than participatory? Someone who's participatory is rested as who they are, and so that is a sign of the fulfillment of that stage of life. Um, so that's and the true, full, trusting autonomy is a sign of that fulfillment. Also, as adults, do you have food issues? Because that's body. So are you like, oh, are you orthorexic? Or in other words, oh, we only have to eat this way, and only this food is good, and only this kind of food is the best. That's actually a sign that you have not completed the fundamental trust of the first stage of life.
It seems like a huge amount of the classic psychotherapy disciplines focus around this area. Like, how do I regulate my bowels, and how do I eat, and what was my relationship to the breast, and all these sorts of very basic capacities and trusts.
Right. So
Uh,
this is what it is to why we call our workbook we're working on really grow up. Uh, and like I said, I came to this by serving children for decades and becoming sensitive to the possibilities of actually serving children, which then meant, oh yeah, the person in the mirror as well. So,
so sort of two directions there. One is, what should adults understand in
mhm,
terms of creating spaces and relating to children about the pitfalls, the things that can go wrong in this stage, and how to prevent them from going wrong. And on the
mhm,
other hand, what is it that a child in this age range is capable of understanding,
mhm,
about itself and about the phase that it's going through with sort
mhm.
of limited reflective capacity?
Oh yeah, it does have a limit. Well, they understand through don't talk to them too much. How many times have I sat around a playground and watched the mom or dad start, well, you can't do that because blah 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 blah. I love how the Peanuts cartoon shows would have the grown-ups talking like this. Rah, 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 rah. That's all you hear when you're a kid. So it should be really simple, and it should be bodily based. That's what they understand. They won't understand concepts. They won't understand parables. They'll understand magic, fairy tales, and some stories. That's how they understand. And they understand most explicitly through the body. There's also stages, of course, in that first stage that there's reproachment phase in about 18 months. There's about 4 years old. The children are no longer so embedded in the gross that they can then take a breath by themselves. For instance, prior to that, you can take your little 1-year-old, 2-year-old in your arms and go, oh, I'm sorry, you're doing so bad. I'm sorry you fell down. Let's take some big breaths together. And you can do it with them. About 4, they can start to do that by themselves. Prior to that, they can't. Um, they can participate in, no, you're just laying around all day watching TV, watching screens. Let's go out and play. Let's be active. They can understand, oh, see, this is much happier. They can understand that, not to be a couch potato, not to be dull. That's one of the errors, is to just be passive. In our screen laden age, it's particularly difficult. So,
What's your take on there's sort of a classic disagreement that human beings have had about this stage in terms of the expression of distress in young people,
mhm.
right? So that there's one school of thought that's come up a lot over the history of our species where they're upset, they're crying or something. You leave them to go through that emotion completely, and learn to self-regulate in that form. And then another school which thinks that's a request for an interaction, for a physical interaction with a caregiver to help them learn to stabilize and harmonize themselves rather than just suffer through that eruption.
Oh, as my beloved Adida says, every inappropriate behavior is a sign of a loss of intimacy. It's good to remember that. If you're seeing inappropriate behavior, that's a signal that the intimacy, they're suffering a lack of intimacy. So, there are times when I remember this, I've seen on Facebook where the kids are throwing a fit, and then the mom moves out of the picture, so the kid throwing the fit can't be seen, but the camera can still see him. They go, moves a little closer. As soon as the mom can see them, or dad, not to be sexist, but as soon as the child can be seen, they can throw the fit, right? And there's places I used to tell my kid when he's crying about having his shit diaper changed that, hey, it's a red ass world. It's true. You can share that life is difficult, but it's happy. As Adidas says, it's a difficult life, but it's a happy way in it. So when they're in a situation where they're not feeling intimate, the main thing to do is restore the sense of intimacy. They know you're there. Now, if they want to then dramatize in addition to that, well, that's another artful matter. Maybe sometimes you let them cry it out. Most of the time, you don't need to do that. Most of the time, you restore the sensation of intimacy.
What do you remember from going through that phase?
Oh, I remember. I have a perfect memory. I remember from age 1 on, really clearly.
What stands out to you as symptomatic of stage 1 in your?
I could eat I could eat as much sugar as I wanted. I remember that. So I do remember that. But I was very independent because my parents had to work, so I was left with lots of people, and I seemed fine. I took off. Which led me to have a kind of a hyper independence in my adulthood, which leads itself to I don't need anything or anybody. So there's a liability from that early years that then became a weakness in my adult years. So, but that also made me quite capable. I was a rich young man by the time I was in my mid-20s because I was completely sufficient. Well, that over-sufficiency has its liability side too. So,
all right.
Let's go on to the second.
Talk to us. Yeah. What happens once I get my real teeth?
You can bite bigger apples. Well, and we all know this, as we can rest, we can start to feel more. That's just plain old anybody, any day. Once you come to a kind of a rest, then that naturally the thing that grows from that is an increased sense of feeling. And so just like the first stage was focused in the body, the second stage is focused in energy or feeling and sensitive to energy. And because of that, membership is huge. Everybody wants to be included at all ages, but it's prominent in these days. I'm in this person's club, and I'm going to start a club, and they don't like me at school. All these kinds of things about membership. These are all energetics, a sensitivity to energies. Coming with that inner sense of energy is you start to feel the interconnectedness of everything. You actually feel it. You sense that we live in a magical in the greatest sense of the word, domain, and things interchange in that. You start to feel the rightness of experience, and you understand, you feel the underlying sense of reciprocity of karma. You start to feel that. It's a feeling. You see that that's true. So in the same way, the first stage is focused on body, and the second stage is focused on feelings. Therefore, any disciplines that need to be enacted with the second stagers are done by agreements. It's like, I tell you what, you set the table every Friday night and you get to pick the movie for the family. Okay, let's shake on it. Because it's a sensation of exchange of energy. That makes most sense. Where the first stager says, I can do it. The second stager says, I feel, therefore I am. And you keep developing these new feelings, and feelings come up, as we know, for no reason at all when you're 8, 9 years old. You're just suddenly you feel bad or weird, or you start to get sensation that I'm a man or a boy. I'm a boy or I'm a girl or I'm halfway in between or whatever it is. These feelings just erupt. And it's like, I always imagine it, the image of the second stage is a bird, because feelings can learn to fly. And when those feelings first crack open, they're pretty ugly and they can't fly right away. But, after some nurturing, then they do fly. So I tell kids, when everybody know when you're just sitting around for no reason and all, some weird feeling comes on you, and every one of them go, oh yeah, well, a new feeling is being born. And it's kind of awkward at first, but it can grow to a complete kind of a new let go that is wonderful. So you have to be able to, the fulfillment of the second stage of life is that you can get, as you mentioned last time, in the flow. You can do things in the flow of things. In the first stager, the test is, will you be a couch potato? The second stager, it's more like, do you exclude others when you feel rejected? You may not be rejected, you just might feel it. Do you then go, well, then I don't like you either, or you can't come to my party? That's the test, is to not reject when you feel rejected.
How much
9-year-old can do this.
Do you think a person's ability to not reject when they feel rejected is predicated upon how the bodily interactions went with others at the previous stage?
Well, and with parents too. Yes. As I said, as Adida points out, every inappropriate behavior is a sign of loss of intimacy. So yes, we have to have that trust and that sensation of intimacy as our base. So we have to handle the first stage of life. It's like a pyramid. You handle the first layer of it, and finally the eye above the pyramid appears when you're done with the growth process of transcendental eye. So yes, if you have a weak first stage, your pyramid's going to look like this, which means they fall over easily. So the foundation of trust and intimacy, touch, care, all those are really important. So,
what's the role of breath in this stage, and to what degree should children be made aware of the role of breath in their emotional life at an early age?
Well, at all ages, like I was pointing out earlier, from the time they can understand, you can do that all along. It's common knowledge. If you take a breath, you'll feel better, right? You hear it on TV even. At 18 months, they can do it with you really well. About 4, you can ask them, oh, you can take a breath by yourself, and they can. Here in the second stage, it's very important. You start, because breath is a form of energy. Breath in almost every language has to do with feeling the etheric or feeling the energy dimension. I tell the kids, rub your hands back and forth really quickly. If you go like this, you can start to feel energetics because you stimulate your nerve endings really quickly on that. And now breathe it. Now you can feel it going out from your hands. Breath is central and key to being able to do that. You're sensitive to others. When somebody comes in the room, you can feel how they are, even if they're putting on an act. It takes a little while to see through the mask of social personas, but even a second stager can do that. So
when you're teaching kids who are in the second stage, what sorts of disruptions do you tend to see, and how do you respond to those?
Well, they're if they understand what's going on. I always thought that if you teach kids about this, you can say, hey, are you trying to remember in my classroom, we were giving attention, not getting attention. You know, you can start to show them there is a cognitive adjunct that is useful, but just being open yourself, being humorous about your situation, being able to let go of the roles. The second stage is all about role. Third stage will be about rules. So role, to make even fun of some of the roles and say, hey, I don't want to be the bad teacher here. Oh yeah, you can use these things. So it's not a method. It's not a technique. You have to bring your own humanity and your own vulnerability, and they'll respond to that a lot. I used to ask my kids what they liked about my the end of every year, what they liked about my way I taught, and every time they said, "Oh, when we mess up and you're really angry at us, you and we go okay, and we get it, you drop it like that." Every time almost every year, the kids went, "Oh, when you get angry, we understand we messed up, but then when we go, okay, we'll quit doing that, you go, oh, okay, and you drop it." So it's not a technique. There's nothing I can tell you. Go, oh, you just when you do this, tell them to take 3 breaths and count backwards from 10. Oh, I hate that stuff. While it may work, it's more about the human that gave the instruction than the instruction itself. So one of the things about the energetics of the second stage is that you get really into something and you're obsessive. Either obsessive on one hand, the other types of people get dreamy. So in either case, they can't hear their mom calling them from dinner. You're just like, I'm so into building this thing, or I'm so into this game, or I'm just in some other world and not just thinking about this. You can be captured by your own immersion in the etheric dimension. That's something that you can tell the child, this is your test right now. That's what you're doing with your energy. So that's something they can understand. They go, oh. So that's you have to be sensitive to your own energy interplay. And if you get mad, then that's an occasion to say, learning to teach, I'm sorry. And they'll understand that. You don't have to. It
seems like a really important thing for adults to appreciate, because I know there's an old school tendency to want to intervene on obsessions and daydreams and bring them back to reality. And I think, not too many generations ago, very often some violence was involved in this, and trying to make them be realistic relative to the situation that we're facing.
Right.
And so that's, I understand that in the short term, that might be a way to accelerate their adaptation to particular tasks a tribe might have to face, but it seems like a danger in terms of long-term development.
Right. No, it's not. It's never necessary, and it's really a sign of failure. And so you can do it. It can be done. It can be done well, and both parenting, like teaching, I've often said, is an imperfect art. It's not a science. It's not just know these 10 techniques and blah 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 blah. Yeah, they're just trying to take your money. It's an imperfect art, and the only thing that makes it work beautifully is if you're always trying. If you're trying, the children understand that. They understand you're not perfect, even though their idealisms will tend to be that way. But you can mess up and yell too much, and then say, "Oh man, I screwed up. I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me?" And then that way, they just learn how to do that themselves. So, almost every parent I've ever met does not accurately understand where their children are at. They always think they're a stage or two, a mini stage or two behind. And the children always are have more depth than you can imagine sometimes.
Before we go to the third stage, there's a little bit of a tangent there that's really interesting to me because I've hosted this other series about sexuality. And so one of the questions that comes up a lot is, how do you convey sexual information to kids? And then one of the underlying questions there is, when is it the appropriate time? Do you wait for them to ask it, or is that already a little bit too late and you should have
No,
initiated communication earlier?
yeah, you can initiate. Here's your good guideline. Answer their questions at the level they asked them. That's a really good guideline. So if they, and we appreciate, and we also, this is another example, emotions and sexuality are intertwined. We sex like we emote. And so if we're emotionally crippled, our sexuality is going to be degenerative or interrupted. And it's only when our own, the fullness, just like the fullness of the first stage is the kid who was able to run down the path without checking to see if he's okay. The fullness of the second stage is free flow. That's why in the Vedics, you treat them like a servant so that they can give their energy, so they can convey their energy, so they can dance their brains out, so they can that's why it's really good in the second stage for children to take up music, playing, listening, art, showmanship, being a puppeteer, being doing things that put it out for others. That is their job, as it were, is serving the meals, taking all the plates from the kitchen to the dinner table. That's what they're best at doing. They learn how to do that. So we've got to learn to let our feeling go in the second stage. That translates into actual sexuality later. But the emotional basis of sexuality is emotional, and you've got to be able to let your feelings go. Obviously, in the second stage of life, emotional fluency is huge. You've got to be able to talk about real things in real terms, and they can. So, and partly by guiding, and partly by confession. Confession instead of telling is always a good modality.
What's the
distinction? You tell, you often do it from your head. When you confess, you do it from the center of your being.
Okay. So we've got two 12-year-olds and a 14-year-old in the house. So the third stage, maybe the socio-intellectual awakening, is of most pertinence to my own life. Guide me through some general characteristics of phase 3.
There is let's start with a very critical distinction. The first two stages of life have a background mood of dependence. Mom, can I do this? Dad, can I do that? It's always, they're dependent. And that's right. In the third stage, they don't go to mere deep independence, but rather there's an oscillation between independence and dependence. That oscillation between independence and dependence creates an underlying mood of dilemma. The mood of the adolescent is that of dilemma. Well, I could do this, but, I could do there, but, I could do this, but, there's all, but stink, as I would tell the kids too. That dilemma is constant in the third stage. You have to appreciate that. The adolescents are always in dilemma, even if it's only a background mood. Sometimes it comes full forward in unbelievable anxiety, but it's always there structurally. It's not a personal problem, it's a structural problem. It's one of the things I love Beloved teaching me, to understand the difference between a structural problem and a personal problem. The dilemma is inherent in the structure of adolescence.
It doesn't mean that something's gone wrong. It means that you're in phase 3.
That's right. Okay. And you have not, the goal is to jump ahead just to see it in context. In the same way, the first stage is body, the second stage is emotions and energy, sensitivities. The third stage is mind. The other side of that coin is will. So they're starting to develop mind and will. The fulfillment of that stage would be when they understand what it is to grow up. They understand what it is to take responsibility, and they understand what it would take to bring their life into harmony, and they will do it. So it's when the will has harmonized the lower life and integrated, and therefore integrated it, that is the fulfillment of the third stage. So that's good to see the span of it there, right? The first stager says, I can do it. The second stager says, I feel, therefore I am. The third stager says, I understand, I will. Now, when that first breaks out, the person that I will is against is you, the parent. You may have noticed. But one of the explicit task of the third stager is to understand their own psycho makeup, how they react to men and women based on how they react to their mom and their dad, how because when they were 8 years old, such and such happened, now they always hate lime or whatever it is. Right. They need to have a pretty thorough, albeit basic, self-understanding.
How do you facilitate that?
Well, you talk to them directly about, hey, do you see how you do that? It's like they can understand. Here's the thing. Where the first stager understands through stories, the second stager understands through myths, the third stager understands through concepts. You go from precept to concept. And they can understand, starting about 12, the triune brain, the higher brain starts awakening, and concepts are available to them. There are not many gods. There's one God in terms of historical sociological evolution. So that they understand the principle. So you can invite them into understanding ideas, patterns, concepts. Oh, you can read stories and say, well, what's the moral of the story? You can maybe do that with the second stagers, right, but they'll say it on a more basic level. Here, you can be you are one of the explicit tasks of an adolescent is to develop discrimination. Are you easily fooled? You can see, oh yeah, I'm very naive about social interactions myself. I see that. That's something for me to learn. People can take advantage of me easily. I'm the last person to get a joke. Those kinds of things they should have a diary. They should be charged with self-understanding. And like Socrates said, an unexamined life is not worth living. They can understand that. And so they understand the difference between short-term happinesses and long-term happiness. They understand what the automaticity of Narcissus in every being, and they see it in themselves. So these are not just, a lot of mythology is actually what I call primary psychology. That's why Freud got it, but they can understand it as a principle. And so that is one of their tasks, to understand through all these ways. So it's explicit. It's not something that's just going to seep in because they watch 5 Star Wars movies. I promise you.
So that's on the understanding side, where you can help with prompting conceptual examination of the world, but also particularly of themselves and their own psyche.
Yep.
On the other side, which is the will side, what supports the development of healthy and effective willpower?
Oh, well, a task, they have to co-create responsibility, freedom dynamic. Here's what it looks like. In the first stager, you tell the kid what to do. No, you have to go to this. Second stager, you make an agreement. Okay, that's an agreement. Let's shake on it. In the third stage, as I like to say, you can't make an agreement with a teenager. Of course you can, but as a joke, which is a good joke, you can't make an agreement with the third stage, nor can you just tell them what to do. You're going to do that. That won't work. Now they can make an agreement if they understand it. They go, okay. You can't go to them and says, you have to do this, this, and this. Instead, you have to go, look, hey, you've grown up a little bit now. The house takes a lot of work, you may have noticed. What do you think your responsibilities could be here on this ship? and let them come up with it. You have to change from being a parent, the absolute mommy daddy figure, to being a friend. And in some cases, in most cultural instances in the history of the world, there's been explicit ceremonies about the release of childhood. And parents say, I'm relinquishing the mommy daddy role, and I'm now going to be your helper in your trial adulthood. And so you never go, you have to do this. You go, what do you think? And so ask them, list all the freedoms they want. That's the easy part. Then you list a bunch of responsibilities that would show that you deserve those freedoms. You make good grades? Yeah, you can stay out all Saturday night. You have straight A's or whatever it is, you know. And then the third list is their creation. The consequences if they don't meet their intended responsibility. And when they screw up, you go, it puts the parent in the position of graciousness. You go, oh, hey, you fucked that up. I did too. Wow, you did a lot better than I did when I was 16. But you said you were going to do this. Do you still think that your consequence should be that? Or do you think you were hard on yourself or easy on yourself? What do you think? Always, what do you think? What do you think?
You're going to bring it back to their assessment.
That's the only way it really works. It really, just like you can't talk to a 4-year-old. Why don't you understand, Johnny? Because if everybody did that, wah, 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 it doesn't work. What really works is, well, what do you think? Well, what do you think? Well, here's the responsibilities, here's the freedoms, here's the freedom you took, but here's the bad thing that happened. Why is that? What do you think? Well, what do you think you should do? So there's a lot of will for you right there. Of course, the third stage is all about achievement, you know, and you notice that we're not being subjugated and rejecting doing what you're told. We in cultural historical terms, we went from parent-child modalities, from pharaohs to kings, to a declaration of independence. That's the beginning of adolescence in cultural world history. Now we're suffering hyper-independence. That is the dark side, the unseen dark side of that, without having the explicit bring it into harmony charge. Everybody, and you'll notice all the movies you see, somebody doesn't listen to somebody and then they achieve it. Or then it's all, the adolescence is riddled throughout the culture. Oh, I didn't do it because I wasn't told. I rebelled and I became the star. That is so common, movie theme, because that is what adolescents need to do. It is good to accomplish. So set themselves out goals, work for them, understand the process of attention, building your attention. So that's my curriculum, big philosophy for little kids, is not only this how to grow up, but what are the basic fundamental things we need to know that children could understand. So there's a lot of will.
You mentioned the idea that a lot of the more ancient cultures had specific rituals to divide up these maturational
Absolutely.
phases. We don't really have very much of that.
No.
Is it essential? Like, what's the minimum degree of ritual marking or ordeal or rites of passage that we might want to even improvise if we haven't had one handed to us?
Absolutely.
Do we have to mark these things?
Yeah, I have on my website on frankmarrero.com, I have a thing called the Transcendence of Childhood Ceremony, where I do a quick review of world cultures and how they've marked this particular transition and how we can adapt that in modernity. Obviously, in some cultures, many cultures, the children left home at 12 or 13, you know, and lived with a group of their own gender, or lived with someone else, or went to the army, or, you know, there's all kinds of ways that was acknowledged in, well, we're not going to do that in modernity. 99% of the time, but we can change explicitly. And when I mean explicit, you write down, dear Salem, I am no longer your daddy. I'm now your friend. And I want to assist you as your friend. I hereby cease holding it over you that I'm the dad, and I want to work with you, and it based on your own assessments of helping your life. Think of me as a friend now instead of dad. Burn it in the fire. Have them having understood the same thing. You can make a ceremony. Ceremonies are good because they mark transitions. So that's something you can do. You can read how lots of cultures did it. Like I said, it's called the Transcendence of Childhood ceremony on my website. That is something anyone can do, but they have to understand what is it to grow up. You can't do it just because you want to. And then you fail. As I tell people, this method is guaranteed to fail. It just fails less than the other ones because they all fail.
So we talked about a little bit about the awakening of the conceptual capacity in this stage, and I noticed that in some of the material you sent me, there was an emphasis on one particular concept, which was temperance, and I'm intrigued about the way in which the person going through phase 3 might be able to understand and incorporate that concept, and how valuable that might be.
Yeah, you have to, like I said, it's imperative that you understand what it is to grow up. Socrates used to love to point out that Sophia, wisdom, was rooted in Sophrosyne, temperance. And you can study this. Why? You can take a lute, and if you tune it too loose, it sounds like crap. If you tune it too tight, it also sounds crap. So it's not about being all right and perfect and clean and pretty all the time. There's a right tightening. And so that's something they can study and should. Doesn't mean you don't ever kick the jams out. No, kicking the jams out is a necessity. And I tell parents, look, everybody's different. As long as your children know there's a corral. Your corral may be small. Joe's over there's corral's too big. He may think your corral's too small, and you may think his corral's too big. On some level, you both might be a little right, but the best thing is there's a corral. Because children, by making limitations, they actually feel embraced instead of restricted. And that's just a study. A third stager should be charged to understand. Study, understand. Tell them, well, what does it take? What is temperance? Why do grown-ups rah about it all the time? Humor is always good, but the fulfillment of the third stage of life, will you come to harmony? Emphasis on will. Well, what is harmony? Not too tight and not too loose. That's how harmony is made. That is the fulfillment. Let me go back to the ancient Greeks for a second, as I love to do. The Iliad and the Odyssey are both centered on Odysseus. And why? Well, there had been a war for 9 years, as you know, a stalemate. At the mythic and the elemental levels, it was even. What broke it? When Odysseus figured out that the Trojans' mythic worshipped animal was the horse. That's why they didn't notice it. They're embedded in mentality. They're embedded in mythology. So he made the Trojan horse, and they didn't notice that it was a trick because they were so embedded in their own mythology. The level of mentality that exceeds mythology was born then, quote unquote. That's why the Greeks loved the book so much. And so it was the advent of concept over precept. It was the advent of conceptual mind, mentality over mythology. That's what won the war. For 9 years, it was stalemate. It was the advent of that. Now, so Odysseus has been the hero of the Iliad. However, when you become clever, you get inside your mind and you can't get out. You're thinking, thinking, thinking. I used to love the Who song, "No One Knows What It's Like to Be a Madman, the Sad Man Behind Blue Eyes," and it says, I'm always thinking, thinking, thinking. That's the challenge in the third stage of life, is you're lost in a forest of thinking, 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 think. And it's a prison. You can't go home. You can't rest in gratitude because you're thinking all the damn time. So to get home is a odyssey. That's why the foundation books of the Western civilization are the Iliad and the Odyssey. The word think and the word thank were originally one word. They split off about this time, being thinking as could be different from thanking. The only way you stop thinking all the damn time so much and being troubled by your ceaseless mind, chatterbox, monkey mind, is to grow in thankfulness. That's the only way. There's no great idea. It's a moral life. It's the gratitude of a moral life. Only in strength of gratitude, thankfulness, does thinking become rightly sized. Will you come to harmony? Will you come to harmony? That's why, if they can see that, then they can understand why restraint is good. You turn neither too loose or too tight.
So the conceptual analysis or suggestion of thankfulness and gratitude should also be a primary thing explored in stage 3?
Absolutely. I have no problems with concepts. I love them, just like I love my genitals in my right hand and my capacity to dance. Love it all.
Okay, so we've got this expansion. We've got the cunningness of Odysseus expanded beyond the symbolic assumptions of the previous phase, and it's a tremendous increase in spaciousness and capacity.
Makes great science.
And yet it's got some kind of limitation, because we seem to be, as your master frequently critiqued, stuck in a civilization that's somewhere in this phase where independence, autonomy, separativeness, tactical and strategic and mechanical cunning sort of dominate the world, and en masse we haven't really been able to make that next transition very well. So why don't you talk a little bit about the cul-de-sac that we're in, about how we get stuck at this adolescent phase?
Right, exactly. No one ever grows up because it's a good idea. It doesn't happen. Nobody grows into adolescence, go, okay, I think I'll grow up. Never has happened in the history of the world. Why do you grow up? Because you get your own shit shoved back in your face. And you go, oh, fuck, I've been a manipulated asshole. I don't want to do that anymore. That is what is required. Humankind will weep. It's going to be bad. There's not going to be a new reset with some kind of automaton chart. That's a parent-child framework. What the only, as Adidas says, the only thing that will make the change is if everybody all at once says so. No, we're not going to live like that anymore. That's what will change. Well, what would make it so that everybody says we don't want to exploit the Amazon so I can have an extra McDonald's? If your shit gets shoved back in your face hard enough and you go, we don't want to live like this. Humankind must weep. Weeping is what is ahead of us. If there's enough of us who have grown into real adulthood, we can have some kind of a soft landing. And if not, how long will the dark ages be? Those are kind of what's in front of us. It's not pretty. As growing up never is. You have to weep. Humankind is about to weep a lot. And the more people that go through their own personal weeping and grow into moral gratitude, service, self-transcending temperance, devotion to what is great, the more that happens in stability, the softer our landing will be. So I'm crying for you. I'm pleading with him for everybody to take on the task of growing up, really grow up.
I guess what I'm imagining is a threshold, which on the one side is characterized by a skill and a confidence in expressing gratitude and a
Mhm,
host of similar emotions, and
mhm,
also this willingness to face a reckoning and
mhm,
take on what we've excluded.
mhm,
And if that doesn't happen, there's this other side, which I think is associated with your mythic image of the three-headed dragon. And
mhm.
maybe you could take us through what that dragon is and how we face
Well,
it.
when you get to when you get to thinking too much, first of all, the background of all adolescence is dilemma. That drives us all crazy. As I tell the kids, nobody escapes the three-headed dragon. Everybody gets bit in the ass by the three-headed dragon. The question is, will you be consumed? Will you be killed? But will you be destroyed by the three-headed dragon? Nobody gets a free pass here. So the three heads are dilemma, doubt. Now, doubt is wonderful. It tells you shit from Shinola, as we say in America. You have to doubt. Doubt is part of the onset of the discriminative mind. Hooray for doubt. Make doubt into a city, a power. It has to be so strong it doubts itself, because it cannot be a modality of living. It has to be a tool, like a sword, we can wield or not. If you're always doubting everything, been there, done that, I don't know about that, you haven't doubted doubt itself yet. You're still using that. And doubt you can't, belief is for children. Doubt is for adolescents. What's beyond that is open-minded, discriminative appreciation. Beyond that is light itself. The subjective and the objective becomes one. So we do have to develop doubt, but we cannot be ruled by it. The third, but as we know, doubt can be quite a crush. And it's not just doubt that's ahead, it's doubt that's also bodily. You walk around, you see people with their shoulders kind of walking, they walk like this. That's also an expression of doubt. The signature of immature thought, particularly immature religious thought, is doubt of the body. Therefore, doubt of sex, therefore, suppression of women. You may have noticed a little bit of this in the world. That's also a form of doubt. It's not just head doubt. There's also whole bodily doubt. Stand up. Take a big breath of the magnificence. Recognize the wonder, the beauty, the divinity of our real existence. That's what a third stager does. Starts to do that. Not from a separative point of view. Not like, oh yeah, there's God and I can go get there. That's nice start, but you have to understand this is divine. This is beauty. And all I am doing is constricting within it. I start to have a self-understanding whereby I see how I disturb this joy. That's real self-understanding. So then you see how you doubt. Your doubt is a constriction. You're doing it. When you don't see it and you're pressed down by your unchecked thinking mind, it's depressing. So dilemma, doubt, and depression are the three-headed dragon of adolescence. What is the cure? What is the solution? It's to live a moral, serving, giving, temperate life. Grow up. Take on responsibilities. And the secret of that is to do it happily, even while you're fucked up in all three stages. Not go, oh, I've really got to heal this trauma. Oh, I've got to fix this. No. Hey, I've got to fix this. Oh, yeah, I've got to do some things that are counter to that. You can do it happily. If you're always in the fix-it mode, you're not doing it in the right mode. It'll work. It'll just take a really long time. Ask any Freudian psychologist. It doesn't work in the fix-it mode. What you have to do is discriminatively understand what you have missed, critically understand what you do, how you err, and then happily address it. As my beloved says, Spiritual life is the magnification of well-being. So understand the magnification of well-being, because we all already are in this happiness. Happiness is the actual substance of reality. And we're doubting it, dilemma about it, and depressed about our thinking. And so understand that. Live a moral, serving, self-transcending, grateful life. And you will slowly but surely come to gratitude. It's an odyssey, indeed, to come home.
It seems like an essential complementary component of psychological diagnosis, because a lot of people get described, say, as depressive in this period. And you would think that unless they're able to understand and embody and appreciate being already worthwhile and happy, then only after that could you start to figure out whether they don't have enough potassium or their brain doesn't produce serotonin correctly or something like that, that we might have to treat in another manner. But that would only be a viable diagnosis if they were already capable of demonstrating themselves as happy beings.
Right. That's right. There are a host of ordinary responsibilities we must take. The potassium balances, the talk with mom you never had, the talk with dad you wish you had had, even if they're great, do it on their gravestone, whatever it is, psychologies, those are all great ordinary responsibilities. But we have a radical responsibility to recognize that we live in beauty. It's a radical responsibility. This is Satchit Ananda. This is, as the master of the Christians said, change your way of looking and seeing, and the kingdom or the estate of divinity is at hand. Repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand, is the medieval translation, terrible translation. Change your way of looking and living, and the estate of the divine, or the heavenly estate is at hand. That's a radical responsibility. The ordinary responsibilities support that, but they're not sequential.
How do you think about the relationship between the capacities that predominate in the lower stages and versions of those capacities that are important to work on in higher stages? Because it seems like there's a difference between the adolescent intellect and Einstein or the authors of the Sutra, or a different kind of use of the intellect. Likewise, learning to be a bodily creature in the first stage has an echo, but is different from people who are trying to reclaim their total somatic wholeness. And the emotional life of the second stage is a little bit different than learning the subtle skills and feeling arts of a more complex human being, and yet they seem connected in some way.
Yeah, they are, but and we could talk about that for hours. But if we handle the essential aspects of the first three stages of life, all the other questions are going to be answered. That's why Socrates always said, just tend to your soul, your feeling being. If you'll do that, all the other questions will be naturally answered. So, yes, there are correlations between the lower centers of the body and the higher centers. And that's a worthy another conversation.
All right. So, a reasonably competent passage through these first three stages, if that's attained, then you're in a pretty good spot for your ongoing development to proceed, with its sort of full complement of skills and options. So I've got two things in mind about that. The first thing that comes up to me is, let's say you're an adult and you didn't have perfect passage through those phases. You might be hung up in some of those areas.
That would be 100% of us.
How do you go back and deal with some of that?
Well, like I said, the key is do it happily.
Yeah.
You have to develop two things. One, discrimination about what it really is. And you can get caught up in all kinds of, this is the right so-and-so, and you're only with this somatic experience, and you got a rebirth and all that stuff. Well, some of that is good, but you have to, that's one of the things in the third stage of life. develop a capacity for acute discrimination. And actual real study is required. So, and it's nice to, of course, I wholeheartedly recommend the teachings of Adida on this subjects. Take up great teachers who have talked about this. When our workbook comes out, what is it to really grow up based on what we've learned from him? That's a good way to do it. But study is required. And then with heart and openness, go forward and happily do it. If you try to always fix yourself, you're not in the right mood yet. It's about the magnification of well-being. There is a place of well-being always available to us. It may be tiny, but it's always available. The magnification of that. Then you rightly engage the things that you need to do, not from a problem point of view, but from a view that's grounded in reality. And what is reality? It's light itself. Have you heard the good news? Energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. This is a realm of light. This is beauty. This is beautiful. And we have to come to not only a ordinary, but a radical appreciation of how we are interfering with this joy. That's the discrimination that is necessary. That's a third stage. Requirement. So we are all growing up, and when will you know that you're growing up? When you start loving, real loving, not romantic, not I love bingo, not I love baseball, not I love you, honey. When it's true love, and we all know it. We could have a whole session on the kinds of loves, but I'll just say real love for now. And then there's stages of that. But when you really love, which is a self-transcending, that's one of the things you prepare for in the third stage. You understand yourself so that you can step beyond it.
That's how it shows up in the third stage. But there's something in that. There's some basic insight structure that's pertinent to all the stages. And I'm curious about it. As I understand it, the Adida teaching has these sort of symbiotic components. And one is the need to mature and develop through all the stages. And as a person develops, they become more and more aware of some kind of transcendental or radical context shift that's also available. But on the other hand, that shift or the insight that leads to that shift can also help you more gracefully accelerate your growth through these stages.
That's right.
Right. So that's
there's a symbiosis there. That's why I said, you have to realize one of the secrets is to be happy about it. That gives the elegance or grace. To me, grace is the elegance of reality. But so get in touch with reality. And what reality is, isness itself, is most wonderful, more than wonderful, as he says. So get in touch with that, with this open-faced, open incarnate, freely incarnate openness. Get in touch with this and then go, oh shit. Ooh, that looks bad. We all have underwear issues. We all have grow-up issues. Well, we don't need to go into dilemma about it. You can do it happily. And we all know what that shift is. That shift is important. And you're right. The more we take ordinary responsibilities, oftentimes our radical capacities are enhanced. But it's still radical. It's radical because it cuts through everything and it goes to the core. Radical, as he points out, means at the root. It's not radical like Abby Hoffman. It's radical it goes to the root of what we're talking about. Radical as in radish, goes to the root. And so that capacity is true anytime. We don't exercise that a lot when we're embedded in our problems, no doubt about it. And we do have to have a certain amount of ordinary human maturation. And we don't need to perfect any of it just reasonably addressed, because reality is so great.
Do you think of these stages as sort of being completely, they're all with us to begin with, like the chakras, and they get emphasized in different stages? Or do you think of it in terms of the sort of neo-scientific concept of emergence, where you don't necessarily have your third stage until you develop it? You don't necessarily have your fourth stage until it grows out of you. Are they all there, or do we bring them into being?
Why do we have brains that is for 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 years that have the capacities that far exceeded our needs? The structure of human maturity and even spiritual maturity are already, all the levels are already with us. Just like the brain, you could take somebody from 80,000 years ago and put them in Harvard. That you don't need to go through all the stages from 80,000. The brain is always ready. They can be a mystic, they can become a world scientist, and a mystic and a saint. From it's all present in it is in the structure of existence. That having been said, there are developmental parts. There are karmas. I may have come into this lifetime with a karma of really, really deep thinker. No, but I could have. And there's karmas that come along, So it's not a pat answer. The great issue is to come to a vision of real existence, which is joy. God-given, so to speak. And demonstrated beautifully, and go, right, that's what I'm interested in. And then go, oh, I'm still got my hands up my ass. Okay, take my hand out of my ass. Okay, I'm still I'm still going with you. I'm a fish, like Orpheus and Jesus, I'm a fisher of men, and him. I'm a fisher of humans. Because get a vision of what is most real. And what is most real is magnificent living, magnificent joy, perfect, free, humorous incarnation. And I've seen it. I've seen it up close and personal. Find that first. And then you will rightly handle all this other business that needs to be handled. And it still takes a goddamn long time.
All right, then. From a position of joy, let's talk a little bit about the conventional education and school system.
Okay.
What's your take on what might be insufficient or going wrong there in terms of helping people maximize their natural maturation through these phases? And what sorts of correctives could there be? What's a better general school system?
There's no vision. That's what's wrong. It's an industrial model made to make people who can hit time cards. And even the people that try to address that have only a vision of a more whole bodily application, which is a great improvement. But there's still can any of those people who in education tell you what it is to really grow up? If you know what it is to really grow up, education is then normalized within that. Education, because ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, education rightly recapitulates history. And there are patterns that you notice. Not only do you recapitulate history, but then you see where it's going because you understand the process of growing up. Think of Isaiah of Deuteronomy, as we often do, 2,500 years ago. And he said, look, in those times when things are really the shit's going to hit the fan, how did he describe the earth? There will be a river. Rivers will run bitter as wormwood, and a smoke will be hanging over all the cities. These are the signs of the pangs of the new birth. Well, was he just had a really cool crystal ball? No, he understood the structure of maturation. And what does the adolescent do? He or she manipulates That's how they do it. They make an abstract difference, like Hamlet holding the skull of, who was it? Whoever he held his skull. Yeah. So as if death were an object. Death is not an object, by the way. So we make this schism, which makes great science. Same word, schism and science are the same word. You make this schism, which makes for great science, but then you get abstracted away from yourself. You're even, remember that old song, I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in? Yeah, oh yeah. Well, that's that schism. And that's the schism that takes a long time to come to thankfulness, that makes an odyssey of coming to thankfulness. You have this abstraction even from yourself. Not only you're abstracted from everybody else, and therefore what you naturally do is manipulate yourself, your others, and the world. And in the future, so they're going to do that so widespread that a smoke will hang over all the cities and the rivers will run bitter as wormwood. The manipulation by adolescents has been foretold for thousands of years. If we do not understand what it is to grow up, so that we repent, to use a crappy word, repent from our manipulation, we never love. We never actually even grow up a little bit so that we can have intimates and have a reasonable chance at relationship. So we have to understand what it is to grow up. The vision is necessary. That will transform education as it transforms everything else. That is what is necessary. Fortunately, we have models. Unfortunately, we're still in a world where we're in a world of provincials that have outgrown their province. And everybody thinks their own little provincial God is universal just because their God happens to be universal. It's a misplacement. My daddy's better than your daddy is kind of the stupid stage we're in. Well, if you don't understand what it is to grow up, you'll think your daddy is better than my daddy is better than your daddy. You know, when you finally realize that your daddy is just a dad and he did pretty good by you, or so, then that's when you can accept others. So I think the main thing to do is to develop a healthy, studied sense of discrimination about all the provinces, about what it is to grow up, and look at examples of people who have grown.
This lack of vision in the educational system seems like it misses a real opportunity, because schools are one of the few areas of life where we really see something like developmental stages, right? We've got like preschool, kindergarten, elementary school, high school, and those sort of roughly approximate this thing, because high school is roughly the time period of the third stage. Right. But then we have post-secondary education, but it doesn't really seem to do anything for the fourth stage. It just seems to
absolutely not. It's
the third stage.
The whole world is still in an adolescent phase. The post is just extended adolescence. Adulthood, human culture is extended adolescence.
So I'm very curious about what a real post-secondary institution would look like in terms of helping people move to that fourth stage. And we talked a little bit before we got started about the Greek tradition of using drama as a way to help migrate from the third to the fourth stage.
Right. Well, that's what theater is. The theater anciently was the theatrical, dramatic representation of the stages into the fourth, so that we had a vision, so that the vision was. But now you can have television about anything. There is no transformation. That was the original change. That was the theater. The theater was invented to show this transformation. Not only the Iliad and the Odyssey were the foundation books of Western civilization to highlight the onset and the liability of adolescence. No doubt about it. Concept over precept. And in the birth of Athena, out of the forebrain, clever Athena, out of the forebrain where concept happens, that's the Athenians. And what did they do? What was in 550 BCE, Pisistratus commenced the building of the first theater in the Western world with marble steps and the whole 9 yards. And what did they show? Why did they have it there? To show the story of Dionysus going through his stages of growth. And the primary one is to go from the 3rd stage to the 4th stage. That is the origin of theater. That's why theater was invented. That's what you're supposed to see. Thea is the word for I see. Theater. What are you supposed to see when you see theater? You're supposed to see a transformation. That's what it is. So we need to regain and recoup all the wisdom that we have skimmed over. See that it has depth. And we also need to see the visions that are given to us by great avatars like Adida, or your own favorite realizers. It's from the higher stages, the first 3 are all the same. Grow up. You know, as Adida says, first become human. And there's an error we make in the 3rd stage of life, that we can turn to the heart. Oh, I just turned to the heart, right? We all, how's that going for you, everybody? It fails. It's not just persisting in it. There's an error in that is something that I can do. In the story of Dionysus, that was the origin of theater, the way he transitioned out of adolescence is through the baptism of Zeus's mother, Rhea. And it's called the secret women's mysteries. You have to give yourself up. Achievement, you do lots and lots of achieving in the 3rd stage. And those are all really good, but you're only outgrow it when you give yourself up. The secret women's mysteries. It's not a subjugation. It's not a surrender in the sense of, oh, king, tell me what to do. We're almost allergic to us, even culturally, of giving yourself up to somebody else. Oh, I can't do that. The king made us. Actually, the word subjective comes from the word of people being pissed off of being subjects of a king. So we have, I have subjectivity that actually is rooted in the disdain for being subject of king. So we're always going, stand up for yourself. What do you think? Well, that's good to be an adolescent, but then post-adolescence, you give yourself up again. You love. You kiss the feet of your lover. You do anything for them. You surrender. This is not subjugation. This is the secret women's mysteries. And that is the key out of the 3rd stage. It is, once you have been nurtured sufficiently, nurturing in Latin, adolescent. It means nurturing. Once you have been nurtured sufficiently, then you give yourself up to the transmitted spirit force. And you give yourself up. This is not the same flow state that everybody loves to talk about nowadays. That's a 2nd stage thing. Flow states. That's the fulfillment of the 2nd stage. The flow of the onset of the 4th stage of life is to receive spirit baptism. That changes party to celebration. That sacrifice is the bridge from adolescence to adulthood. The word adult is the past perfect participle of adolescence. You've already been an adolescent. You are already nurtured. Now you are an adult. So what true adulting is beyond achievement. You can receive fully, not achieve with magnificence. That's also required. You must be able to put your will together and achieve things. That's required of adolescence. And so all the cultural trumpets of, oh, he achieved this and this. Great. Thumbs up. Now let's grow up. Now there's more. And what is more cannot be achieved. And you must submit to, when the Spirit comes upon you, you must yield. There's your secret women's mysteries. That is the transition.
So stage 3 requires a fulfillment of all the adolescent skill building of understanding and will, self-regulation and achievement capacity.
Harmony.
And then it requires the understanding of how to go beyond these things in, on the one hand, being able to receive our shit back to us. And on the other hand, being able to make gestures of gratitude and surrender that are adequate, that we connect with something that's sort of inherently nourishing, which we also have to learn how to receive.
Yes.
And a lot of that is symbolized in the great sacred dramaturgy of the ancients, such as the early Greek theater. But I have another question about theater, which is it, how useful is it for the adolescent to engage in that practice of being in theater, right? Like, it seems like the taking roles and experiencing the plurality of the self and being able to have distance from what you're doing and yet be completely in it, that those might be really important skills, and skills important to understanding the richness and diversity of the human experience, what it's like to be lots of different kinds of people.
It's a great study for a variety of reasons. First, things like Oedipus. There's a lot of psychological information in those in there. It's got a lot of, the real theater has a lot of true lessons, wisdom. The second is, you know, what the Greeks, what the Romans called the mask, were called, you would speak through her, the mask, speaking the sounds, sona. So you're, what is a person is someone who speaks through a mask. In the Hellenes, the Athenians, they called it hypocritus. So if you don't know that you have a mask, you're just a hypocrite. So can you take the mask off? Only if you have sufficient character. So the depth of character is what is required. You know, we all have this highs and lows that we go through. It's like waves, right? You have to be able to stand below the waves. What do you experience when you stand below the waves? The ocean. And what is it? What is the word for stand below? Substance. You have to be a person of substance. Then you intuit the ocean that gives rise to waves. So I'm saying it over and over again. We have to grow up. We have to be a person of substance. And that's real. And that is the real ocean. You stand below the waves by being a person of substance. The theater is a great tool, but you could do it in a variety of ways. You know, that's just another good one.
About the appreciation of the subconscious, because it seems like, you know, insofar as the stage 3 adolescent personality, which is tied into Western civilization and maybe modern Western civilization especially, it has this notion of the individual rational agent. And it's very often a linear agent. And we've learned a lot of, we've learned a lot of things in terms of our science in the last 100 years, which says, yeah, that doesn't describe the world even in a scientific sense, that there's so much complexity and nonlinearity, and most of your processes are unconscious or subconscious. So is there something about that transition from the third to the fourth that involves appreciating the rest of the patterning of the universe that fell outside of what was available to the adolescent intellect?
Great question. The third stage is a lot about knowing. The stages beyond it are about mystery, not knowing. That's why the Lao Tzu, you know, he will say, if you think you know it, you don't. If you don't, you know, not knowing is it. There's from the agnostics to Lao Tzu. What did my buddy Socrates always say? Socrates always say, the only thing I know is I know nothing. So you do have to give up knowledge. It's not about a knowing. The mantra of the adolescent, well, that's my point of view. You have to grow beyond point of view. How do you grow? That's unthinkable to most people. What do you mean, no point of view? Everybody has a point of view because they're projection and they're da 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 da. The science of the last 100 years tells us we're just projecting our point of view. Well, there is a stage beyond adolescence, and it is beyond point of view, and it is a stage of divine ignorance. When you're in love, you don't worry about knowing something. As a simple example, one of my favorite quotes of Adida is, all space, the moon and stars, the clouds and sky, the sun itself, and what is beyond are all objects of our expansive interest, whereby we counter the effects of our busy self-consciousness and earth consciousness. Therefore, always be alive to what you do not yet or ever can possess and know. Wonder rests the vital being and cools the brain. When you are free to know nothing and be nothing, then you may hear what is truth, and so become a devotee of the unknown through eternal and always present divine ignorance. That's why Adida teaches the children, his teaching for children, he teaches them, it's about the mystery. It's not, knowing is an adolescent thing, most fully. And it's great. I have several limbs put back on me. I really love science. There's probably no greater lover of science than me. I love science. It's just, you can block out the sun if you hold a raisin close enough to your eye. So knowledge is important, but it's only this big. You hold it right here, that's all you see. But it's really just right this much. So we have to be able to size everything rightly. By appreciating knowledge too, just like we learn to appreciate doubt. Doubt is wonderful, but if it starts to be your modus operandi, you haven't grown up yet. Knowledge is the same way. Knowledge is great, love it. You're required a lot of it, but at some point, just like you give yourself, that's like achieving knowledge. At some point, the third stage of life achievement event goes into giving yourself up. The secret women's mysteries. It's called the women's mysteries for a reason. It's yielding. It is open. It is unfixed. It is not assertive. It's the opposite of all that. And that is the transition into the fourth stage of life. I'm reminded of Saint Teresa of Avila, how her meditation was just to sit with her eyes down and imagine that Jesus was standing right in front of her, loving her. You know how hard it is to feel loved? I'm asking that as a personal question. You know how hard it is to feel like you are loved? That's very difficult, actually. I think it's one of the most difficult things, is to actually and deeply and thoroughly feel that you are loved. That is the secret women's mysteries. Receive. As Adida says, be heart found by me, the only one who is. The secret women's mysteries, it's beyond something, nothing you can achieve. It's nothing you can know. It's nothing you can doubt into existence. We have to yield beyond and feel loved and invaded by spirit force. Then we love rightly. Then we usually go back into our silly lives and improve a few things. We don't escape the past by diving into it. We escape the past by living differently in this moment. Yes, I learned from him.
Several themes we've come across that we could and maybe should do a whole episode on. But before we finish up, maybe you could give us a quick sense of what the transitions are into the fifth, sixth, seventh stages.
Well, when you're stable in love, even for a few breaths, often there's raptures. Often there's delight in an upward kind. It's not necessary, as Adida has pointed out, but lots of people go that way. And you become incredibly joyous in the upward fashion and receive. The fourth stage of life, by the way, is about reception. It's a downward, incarnating, receiving. It's not, once that has its fullness, then it turns and goes, has an upward thing. But first, it's a full reception of love, real love. Be heart found, the secret women's mysteries. And then there's a natural turning in the body. It comes down the front, starts going up the back. And when it gets up really high in the back, it's the brain core. The brain core gets lighted, and you can see the ventricles of the brain from the inside out. And they look like wings. And thus we have the swans of the east and the dove of the west. And then it overflows the crater, what the Orphics called the crater, the overflowing. My crater is also the word for cup. You've heard my cup runneth over. That's all fifth stage. And those are wonderful. Fortunately, not having the maturity to experience this, I've been given these baptisms of this by Adida personally, so I can speak of it authentically rather than studiously. But it was just a gift. No virtue on my part. Let's just start with that. And then once the energies of the up and the down have settled sufficiently, there is consciousness itself only. And you turn, nothing is as good as that. So you turn away from everything and reside in this, what is called soul realization, or consciousness or witness itself. That is the sixth stage. There is no seventh stage beyond that. The seventh stage is given from the beginning by being in the company of someone who is this. It's not a progression in that sense. It's not. The only progression is growing up and coming to the point where you can receive love. So the higher stages have a deceptive, from an adolescent point of view, it seems like the seventh stage is beyond the sixth. But that's from an adolescent point of view. From a heart point of view, the seventh stage is already pouring on you, and you just have to adapt to it. So, and that's the truth anyway. But from a adolescent point of view, you look like you're going up, 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 up to God. And whereas the pretty close to the opposite is true. We're being baptized, poured upon by the one who is always already the case, and giving us her person in person, just like Teresa of Avila. That's a great fourth stage vision, her meditation. So the seventh stage is not on top. But the first six stages are. The first six stages have this kind of hierarchy. The seventh stage is not on top of all of that. The seventh stage is the light itself, of which every stage from clay, light is the substance of clay, as is the substance of sex, as is the substance of achievement, as is the substance of love, as the substance of mystic visions, as is the substance of consciousness itself. It's not beyond that. Light is already the substance of all of that. So, unfortunately,
it's almost like it's perpendicular to the development.
It's almost like it's perpendicular. Yeah. I know, and that's an adolescent point of view. There's also a horizontal method, which goes from the left heart, which is, I love baseball. I love you, honey. Oh, I love. It always has a sense of promise. Right. Oh, I love this. We're going to be so great together. I love this new job, whatever it is. It's as big as all outdoors, as I like to say. And then we go to the middle heart, which is what is traditionally called true love, or the early Christians used two Greek terms, agape and eros, to distinguish between the left heart and the middle heart. And the middle heart is true love, real, for chakra, saintly, And then you don't have to do the mystic. You can go from the middle heart up and do the mystic tour, or you can just go straight to the heart on the right, which is consciousness itself. Present, life in and as the tacit feeling of being. The tacit feeling of being in the heart. That's the heart on the right. So that's a horizontal description rather than I always have, it always needs to be, this upper vertical dimension always needs to be countered by the horizontal dimension, because it's not an up thing. God is not up. God is here. This. So all our up stuff is adolescence. Going to the top of the mountain. Going on the adventure. Being a warrior. That's third stage. It's just third stage. Great shit. But it's just, see it for what it is.
It reminds me of a documentary I saw about Ram Dass, and the interviewer spoke with Timothy Leary and said to him at one point, well, you know, Ram Dass believes in a higher power, don't you? And Leary sort of laughed, and he reached down and he swooped his hand along the floor. And then he just sat back up and didn't say anything. Oh, he's indicating it's not higher. It goes deep. It goes all the way down. It's not directional in that simple sense.
Those are all adolescent points of view.
Yeah.
And we're in an adolescent culture, and you and I and your listeners are all going to interpret this from an adolescent point of view. But when we really start to understand that, it breaks down.
Yeah. And
it's not so compelling. And we start to take responsibilities for our life in toto, and, and we're available to grace, or the elegance of reality, and to the grace of someone who has demonstrated this most beautifully. In Socrates's cave, there were the people who just saw the images on the wall, right? And they thought that was reality. They saw the broad outlines. They could describe a person, silhouette. They could describe a lot of things about that person. They thought that was reality. And then the people who were by the fire, putting the objects in front of the light, they went, ha ha ha, we know this is reality, right? These are all cave points of view. That's an adolescent. Oh, the science will show you it's just light flowing across there. And, that's adolescence. And the mythic minded must see the broad outlines, and everyone's chained. Those are all still cave points of view. Point of view is childhood and adolescence. You know what the word ecstatic means? It means to stand out. That's what the word means. Stand out of the cave. There's no point of view in your ecstasy. That's gone beyond. And there was another figure in that story, the sunlight man, male in that particular story, the sunlight man, who was the sunlight. And that is, Adida is a sunlight man. There have been many sunlight persons. They don't have point of view. They have grown beyond mythic and rational points of view, not in the cave of, well, it's my point of view, it's my opinion. That's outshined in light itself. So I'm so grateful. I'm infinitely grateful that I have been given the gifts I've been given so I could speak to you, but these are gifts from him. Look at him. Look at that face. What a freely incarnate as joy. And I spent many hours literally face to face with him, touching him. And he is the daylight person in person, and never experienced anything but absolute service, absolute joy in his company.
Well, let me say that I love the clarity that you're bringing to the healthy transition beyond adolescence, this project of enfolding a developmental understanding into the educational process and making that aware in the minds of the children themselves as they go through it seems to be really beautiful and important.
Mm-hmm.
I always like talking to you. You have a very lively classical intellect, and you you hold this, steady brightness invocation very strongly. And I love feeding on that. And I talk to a lot of people who have spiritual masters and teachers, and they're not so happy and overt about it as you are. So that's a very lovely thing.
The graces I've been given are unfathomable. And I know I was a semi-illiterate hillbilly who knew nothing. So everything you hear from me that you feel like even a little bit was given by him. That is 100% sure. And he told me to go study the Greeks, and he taught me to read. He told me to read Teresa of Avila. He told me to read all of Ramana Maharshi, all of Sri Maharishi, Ramana, all that. It's his direction. So I'm glad to be able to pass on in a very human and with the freedom, with the touch of the freedom he gave me to you. I'm glad you appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Frank. And I hope we can come back and have some more sessions on some of these other topics that stood out to us along the way.
Absolutely, my friend. And hope you have me back when we get our workbook out, Really Grow Up.